The M2 Browning roared like thunder.
Go!
Snow erupted in white plumes across the killing field, each tracing titanium streaks through the storm. Garrett Mercer's hands gripped the gun's spade handles the way other men held their grandfathers' tools, familiar, respectful, absolute. Brass casings tumbled hot into the snow beside his boots, hissing as they died in the cold. 500 meters downrange, the Calivran forces advanced. Their armor gleamed despite the blizzard surfaces, smooth as river stones, untouched by weather or doubt. Hover vehicles drifted above the ice, humming with the kind of confidence that came from conquering 47 worlds without breaking a sweat. Energy shields shimmered around each soldier, translucent membranes that bent light into rainbows. Beautiful. Alien. Utterly certain of their superiority. Commander Zarketh's voice cut through external speakers, smooth as oiled machinery. Sergeant Mercer, you fire a weapon designed when your species still burned fossil fuels for transportation. Surrender your antique and we grant mercy to your unit. This need not end in embarrassment. Garrett didn't answer immediately. He adjusted his sight picture, breathed out slow, let his heart settle between beats. 62 years old and his hands still remembered the rhythm. The M2 didn't care about his age. It cared about maintenance, respect, and the man behind the trigger knowing his business. He chambered the next round with a metallic clack that echoed across the frozen wasteland. Antique. His voice came rough, shaped by 40 years of cigarette smoke. He'd quit a decade back in cold mountain air. He never would. Son, this gun's been killing things since 1933. Works better than your whole damn army. The Calivran's shields flared as the first burst hit. One of them stumbled, and Garrett Mercer smiled. Montana didn't apologize for November. The sky hung low and gray, pregnant with snow that hadn't decided whether to fall or just threaten. Garrett stood in his barn with the doors open wide, letting the cold air flow through. Kept him sharp. Kept him honest. Sarah used to say he had ice water in his veins, but she'd said it smiling like it was something she loved about him, rather than something she endured. Sarah had been gone 3 years now. The M2 sat on his workbench like a sleeping predator. Disassembled, spread across oiled cloth in perfect order, barrel group, bolt receiver, feed mechanism. Every piece cleaned, inspected, measured against tolerances older than most of the trucks on the highway. Garrett's hands moved without conscious thought. Apply oil here. Check headspace there. Run a patch through the barrel until it came out clean as prayer. This wasn't nostalgia. This was religion. The gun had saved his life in 3 different wars. Desert sand, jungle rot, mountain cold that made Alaska look like spring break. It had never failed him. Not once. All it asked in return was respect and maintenance, same as any good marriage. He was installing the barrel when he heard the truck. Not his neighbors. They drove Ford's old ones, the kind that announced themselves from a mile away with rattles and diesel coughs. This was something newer. Quieter. Government issue quiet. Garrett didn't reach for the .45 under the bench, but he knew exactly where it was. A National Guard Humvee pulled up the gravel drive, kicking up dust that hung in the still air. The door opened and a kid climbed out. Couldn't be more than 25. Thin in the way engineers were thin, like their bodies were afterthoughts to whatever problems lived in their heads. He wore BDS that looked freshly issued, creases sharp enough to cut bread. Master Sergeant Mercer. The kid's voice carried across the yard, formal and careful. Retired. Yes, sir, I know. The kid walked closer, hands visible, respectful. Good instincts. I'm Private Elijah Brennan. Everyone calls me Eli. I'm with the 163rd Infantry out of Bozeman. I was told you could teach me about the Browning. Garrett studied him, soft hands, college ring on his finger, eyes that looked at the M2 like it was a museum piece instead of a tool. You an engineer, software, before the guard, I mean. Eli stopped at a respectful distance. I know that probably doesn't. You know how to use a wrench? Yes, sir. Then get over here and learn something useful. Eli crossed the threshold like he was entering church. His eyes went wide when he saw the disassembled M2, all that brutal, mechanical simplicity laid bare. Garrett watched the kid's face, saw the gears turning. It's so simple, Eli breathed. Simple's not the same as easy. Garrett handed him a cleaning rod. You maintain this gun right, it'll fire 100 years from now. You maintain it wrong, it'll jam when you need it most and get you killed. There's no programming fix, no software patch, just physics and the man behind the trigger. They worked in silence for a while. Garrett showed him how to check headspace, how to time the gun, how to read wear patterns on the bolt. The kid asked good questions, didn't pretend to know things he didn't, wrote notes in a little book he pulled from his cargo pocket. Why the M2, Eli asked eventually. I mean, we've got so many newer systems. The M240, though, you ever see an M240 work after it's been buried in sand for 3 days? No, sir. I have. It doesn't. Garrett picked up the bolt, held it to the light, examined the firing pin. The Ma Deuce fires when it's frozen solid. Fires when it's hot enough to cook eggs on the receiver. Fires underwater if you're stupid enough to try. I've seen it run for 10,000 rounds straight with nothing but barrel changes. You know why? Eli shook his head. Because when John Browning designed this gun, he wasn't trying to be clever. He was trying to be right. Garrett set the bolt down. There's a difference. Clever fails when conditions change. Right works forever. The kid absorbed that, wrote it down. They were reassembling the feed mechanism when Garrett's phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again. You gonna get that? Eli asked. Garrett pulled the phone from his pocket. 3 missed calls, all from the same number, Department of Defense. He felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the November air. He answered the 4th call. Mercer? Master Sergeant Garrett Mercer. A woman's voice, professional, efficient. This is Colonel Andrea Voss, Northcom. We need you to come in for consultation regarding a developing situation. How soon can you be at Malmstrom Air Force Base? I've been retired 9 years, Colonel. I'm aware. This isn't about retirement, Sergeant. This is about expertise we can't find anywhere else. We have a situation involving foreign military assessment, and we need NCOs with extensive crew-served weapons experience, specifically the M2 Browning. Garrett looked at the half-assembled gun on his bench, at Eli watching him with wide eyes, at the photograph of Sarah on the wall smiling in front of their old house before the cancer. What kind of assessment? The kind that decides whether Earth gets a seat at the table or a boot on the neck. The Calivran Empire arrived 3 days ago. They're demanding we prove our combat viability before they'll consider us for Galactic Council membership. If we fail their evaluation, we remain under indefinite probation. Restricted trade, restricted travel, permanent second-class status. And you need old guns for this, why? There was a pause. When Colonel Voss spoke again, her voice had lost some of its professional edge. She sounded tired. Because they're testing us with their most advanced combat systems, energy shields, plasma weapons, hover vehicles. Our doctrine says we should meet them with equivalent technology, but our intelligence suggests their shields have a blind spot. They're optimized against energy weapons. Kinetic rounds, especially heavy caliber, don't register on their threat assessment systems until impact. So you want to fight advanced aliens with World War II guns? I want to fight them with weapons that work. Can you be here by tomorrow? Garrett looked at Eli. The kid was pale, processing what he'd heard. His hands had stopped moving on the feed tray assembly. I can be there by tonight, Garrett said, on one condition. Name it. I bring my own assistant. Kid named Brennan. He's green, but he's learning. Another pause. Approved. There's a transport leaving from Great Falls in 4 hours. Don't be late, Sergeant. She hung up. The barn was silent except for the wind. Eli found his voice first. Did she just say aliens, like actual aliens? Apparently. And we're going to fight them with that. He pointed at the M2. Garrett picked up the barrel assembly, sighted down the bore, checked for obstructions. Perfect. Clean as the day it was machined. Not fight, demonstrate. He began reassembling the gun with practiced speed. They think we're primitive, obsolete, not worth taking seriously. So we're going to show them what obsolete looks like when it's aimed at their face. That's insane. Probably. Garrett locked the barrel into place with a solid click. You coming or not? Eli stared at him, then at the gun, then back at him. I'm a software engineer. Yeah, and I'm a 62-year-old rancher with arthritis in my left knee. We all got our problems. Garrett started packing tools into a canvas bag. But right now, the United States military needs people who know this weapon system inside and out. There aren't many of us left. Most guys my age are dead, too broken to serve, or smart enough to say no. Which one are you? Garrett smiled. It wasn't a kind expression. I'm the one who can't let someone else do the job wrong. The flight to Alaska was long, cold, and honest about what waited at the other end. They'd loaded the M2 and 6,000 rounds of linked ammunition onto the transport, a C-13. Oh, that had seen better decades, but still flew straight. Garrett sat in the webbing near the cargo, one hand resting on the gun's receiver, like a man might rest a hand on his dog's head. Eli sat across from him, typing furiously on a tablet, pulling up everything he could find on the Calivran Empire. Says here they've conquered 47 worlds, Eli muttered. Not invaded, not occupied, conquered. Average campaign duration, 72 hours. How? Superior technology across every domain. Energy shields that dissolve kinetic threats. Plasma weapons that cut through conventional armor like paper. Hover vehicles that ignore terrain. And their doctrine is based on rapid, overwhelming force followed by complete communication dominance. Garrett absorbed that. They ever lose, Eli scrolled more, shook his head. Not according to this, every species they've engaged has either surrendered immediately or been crushed within a week. Then they're overconfident. Or we're outmatched. Same thing eventually. Garrett stood knees popping and walked to the small window. Below mountains gave way to tundra, tundra gave way to ice. Alaska in November looked like the end of the world practicing for the real thing. You scared, Eli asked. Garrett thought about the photograph on his barn wall, about the M2 and all the men who'd used it before him, some of whom had died behind it, most of whom had lived because of it. Yeah, he said, fear keeps you sharp. It's arrogance that kills you. They landed at Forward Base Yukon 3 hours before sunset. The base was new construction, thrown up in weeks after the Caliveran made contact. Prefab buildings crouched against the permafrost like metal tumors. Satellite dishes pointed at the sky. And everywhere soldiers moved with the careful efficiency of people who knew they were being watched. A captain met them at the flight line. Young, competent, scared. Master Sergeant Mercer, I'm Captain Rodriguez. Welcome to the end of the world. He gestured toward a waiting Humvee. We've got you set up in Building 7 with the other recalled NCOs. Briefings at 0600. The Caliveran are scheduled to arrive at 0900 for preliminary inspection. Inspection of what? Us, our weapons, our tactics, our worthiness. Rodriguez's jaw was tight. They're treating this like a science fair, and we're the baking soda volcano. They drove through the base. Garrett counted personnel, mostly younger soldiers, National Guard, reserves. A smattering of active duty, but not many. This wasn't a frontline unit. This was a demonstration team assembled to prove Earth wasn't completely helpless. It didn't inspire confidence. Building 7 was a barracks filled with men who looked like Garrett, older weathered, carrying the kind of scars that didn't show on medical records. A gunnery sergeant from the Marines, an Army Master Sergeant who'd done 3 tours in the sandbox, a Navy chief who'd worked ship-mounted weapons. All recalled, all experts in systems the modern military considered obsolete. They're scraping the bottom of the barrel, one of them said. Garrett recognized him, Miller, a gunny from Camp Pendleton they'd crossed paths with in Iraq. We're the dinosaurs they drag out when the new toys don't work. Maybe that's the point, Garrett said. Maybe dinosaurs are exactly what we need. Dawn came late and reluctant. Garrett stood in the armory checking and rechecking the M2. Eli watched, taking notes, asking questions. Around them, other teams prepared other weapons, M60s, M240s, an honest-to-God M1919 that looked like it had fought in Korea and held a grudge about it. You think this'll work? Eli asked quietly. I think if it doesn't, we're about to become a galactic punchline for the next 1,000 years. At 0900 exactly, the sky split open. Not figuratively. The Caliveran ship descended through clouds like a needle through silk, utterly silent, utterly controlled. It was beautiful in the way a sword was beautiful, purposeful, elegant, designed to remind you that someone smarter than you had built it to end arguments. The ship landed 200 meters from the base perimeter. A ramp extended, and they emerged. The Caliveran stood 7 feet tall, their bodies encased in armor that seemed to flow rather than articulate. No visible joints, no seams, just smooth surfaces that caught the weak Arctic sunlight and held it like stolen fire. Their heads were elongated faces hidden behind visors that showed nothing but reflections. At their center walked Commander Zarketh. Garrett knew it was him immediately. The way he moved, the way the others deferred, the way he stopped at exactly the right distance to make the humans crane their necks to look up at him. Zarketh's voice came through external speakers translated into English that sounded like it had been learned from textbooks and shaped by contempt. I am Commander Zarketh of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet, Caliveran Imperial Forces. I am here to assess your species' combat viability and determine your fitness for Galactic Council candidacy. You will present your weapon systems for evaluation. You will demonstrate tactical competency. You will answer all questions truthfully. This is not a negotiation. This is a measurement. We will determine if you are children playing with fire or a species capable of standing among stars. Colonel Voss stepped forward. To her credit, she didn't flinch. Commander Zarketh, welcome to Earth. We're prepared to demonstrate our capabilities. Demonstrate. The word came out like an insult. Yes, we shall see what you believe worthy of demonstration. The inspection began. Zarketh and his entourage moved through the armory with the clinical detachment of scientists examining bacteria cultures. They paused at each weapon station, scanned, analyzed, discussed in their own language a series of clicks and harmonics that made Garrett's teeth ache. When they reached the M2, they stopped. Zarketh stared at it for a long moment. Then he did something Garrett hadn't expected. He laughed. The sound came through the speakers like breaking glass wrapped in silk. This, Zarketh pointed one long, armored finger at the M2. This is your demonstration weapon. This fires, what solid projectiles propelled by chemical combustion. Yes, sir, Garrett said. His voice came level, calm. The way you talked to drunk privates who thought they were bulletproof. How old is this design? Basic platform 91 years. Zarketh turned to his officers, more clicking, more harmonics, then back to Garrett. Sergeant, Mercer, yes, he'd clearly accessed their personnel files. You are 62 standard years old, veteran. You have used this weapon system for 40 years, give or take. 40 years with a 91-year-old design, and you believe this represents your species' combat capability. Garrett felt Eli tense beside him, felt the other NCOs watching, felt the weight of Earth's reputation balanced on whatever came out of his mouth next. I believe this represents what works, he said. Technology changes. Physics doesn't. This gun fires a half-inch diameter projectile at 2,800 feet per second. It'll punch through engine blocks, brick walls, and most body armor ever made. It works in deserts, jungles, Arctic conditions, and underwater. If you're desperate enough, it doesn't need batteries. It doesn't need software updates. It just needs a man who knows his business and enough ammunition to finish the job. Primitive, Zarketh said. The word hung in the cold air like a verdict. Barbaric, obsolete. Your species still clings to mass propulsion in an era of directed energy warfare. You are fighting yesterday's wars with yesterday's weapons, and you wonder why you lose. We haven't lost yet, Garrett said quietly. Only because you have yet to fight anyone who matters. Zarketh gestured dismissively. These weapons are museum pieces, relics of a violent, inefficient past. My shields can analyze incoming threats at the molecular level and generate counterfields in nanoseconds. Your bullets would dissolve before striking armor. Your tactics would fail before the first casualty. You are children with firecrackers convinced you understand warfare. Eli's hand drifted toward his sidearm. Garrett caught his wrist, squeezed once. Not now. Colonel Voss stepped forward again. Commander, with respect, we request the opportunity to demonstrate effectiveness rather than debate theory. Zarketh tilted his head, a gesture that somehow conveyed both amusement and pity. Very well. Tomorrow morning, 0600 hours, we will conduct a field demonstration. You will deploy your weapons. We will deploy our standard reconnaissance force. We will evaluate your capability to engage a peer military force. The trial will last until you surrender your weapons fail or you achieve mission objectives, which I assure you will not occur. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Colonel Voss. This demonstration will be observed by the Galactic Council's High Arbiter. The results will be broadcast to every species in the network. Your performance tomorrow will determine not just Council membership, but how every civilization in known space perceives humanity for the next 1,000 years. Do try not to embarrass yourselves more than necessary. The Calaveran filed out. The base was silent. Garrett looked at the M2, at Eli, at the other NCOs who'd been dragged out of retirement to defend Earth's honor with weapons older than most of their children. Whoop-ow, Miller said eventually. Shit. Yeah, Garrett agreed. Shit. That night, Garrett couldn't sleep. He sat in the barracks alone, field stripping the M2 for the third time, checking tolerances, measuring headspace, looking for any excuse to believe this would work. Eli found him around 0200. Can't sleep either, the kid asked. Sleep's overrated. Garrett didn't look up from the bolt he was examining. You should try, though. Tomorrow's going to be long. You really think we can do this, beat their shields? Garrett set down the bolt, picked up the barrel, sighted through it at the overhead lights. The rifling was perfect, sharp, aggressive, ready to grab a bullet and send it spinning toward whatever needed killing. I think their shields are designed to counter threats they understand, he said. Energy weapons, plasma, lasers, things that announce themselves with signatures and heat and electromagnetic profiles. They've conquered 47 worlds, and I'd bet money every one of those worlds fought them with technology that looked like their technology. Advanced, elegant, smart. And we're going to fight them with dumb bullets. Dumb bullets that don't show up on their sensors until impact. Dumb bullets that don't give them time to calculate counterfields. Dumb bullets that just are. Garrett reassembled the bolt with practiced storm speed. The question is whether we can deliver enough before they adapt. What if they adapt immediately? Then we lose. Earth becomes a protectorate. Our grandkids grow up bowing to alien overlords. And 60 years from now, some other old man will be sitting in a barn somewhere cleaning an even older gun, wondering when humanity forgot how to stand up. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then, my grandfather was a soldier. He used to say the same thing about his weapons. Old, but they worked because they were true. Garrett looked up. Something in the kid's voice had changed, steadier, older. Your grandfather was right. Truth doesn't age. It just gets tested more. He held out the bolt. Here, install this. Show me you learned something today. Eli took the bolt. His hands shook slightly, but he got it seated. Checked headspace without being told. Set the timing without prompting. The kid was learning. What happens if we win? Eli asked. Then Earth gets a seat. We get respect. We get to stand among the stars as equals instead of pets. And if we lose, Garrett thought about Montana. About November and all the quiet years he'd thought he had left before someone asked him to matter again. Then at least we made them work for it. Morning came with the kind of cold that made your lungs ache. Garrett stood behind the M2 checking belt feed one last time. Around him, the other teams prepared their positions. The demonstration area was a flat expanse of snow and ice 800 meters across, ringed by observation posts where generals and politicians and aliens would watch Earth either rise or fall. Eli crouched beside him, tablet in hand, running final calculations. Their shields regenerate in 1.8 seconds, he muttered. If we can sustain fire longer than that, keep hitting before they recharge. I know. Garrett's voice was calm, flat. The voice of a man who'd done this before in places where the stakes were men's lives instead of species' reputations. Just call my corrections and stay low. When this starts, it's going to get loud. The Calaveran forces deployed at 0600 exactly. 20 soldiers, 3 hover vehicles, all of them radiating the kind of confidence that came from never losing. Their shields shimmered to life, translucent membranes that caught the weak sunlight and bent it into rainbows. Commander Zarketh stood at the center, his armor gleaming despite the snow. He activated his external speakers. Human defenders, we will advance at walking speed. You will engage with your weapons. We will demonstrate the futility of kinetic warfare against modern military technology. When you have exhausted your ammunition or accepted defeat, signal surrender, and we will cease advancement. Are you prepared? Colonel Voss's voice came over the radio. Sergeant Mercer, you are cleared to engage at your discretion. Show them what we've got. Garrett settled behind the M2, felt the cold metal through his gloves, smelled gun oil and snow, and the particular electricity of moments that couldn't be taken back. He thought about the barn, about every man who'd ever sat behind this gun and trusted it with his life. Eli, he said quietly, get down. The kid dropped behind cover. Garrett aligned his sights, breathed out slow, let the world narrow to crosshairs and target and the space between heartbeats. Zarketh began his speech. You fire a weapon designed when your species still burned fossil fuels for transportation. You fight with mass propulsion, a technology we abandoned 200 years ago. You cling to primitive... Garrett squeezed the trigger. The M2 Browning spoke. And the world learned what obsolete really meant. The first round left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second. For 1.8 nanoseconds, the Calaveran shield detected nothing. No energy signature, no electromagnetic profile, no thermal bloom that registered as threat relevant. Just dumb metal wrapped around chemical propellant, following Newton's laws like they were scripture. Then physics arrived. The shield flared brilliant blue-white sensors screaming as they tried to analyze something that gave them nothing to analyze. The counterfield generator spun up, attempted to create opposition, for it found no energy pattern to oppose. The bullet didn't care. It pushed through resistance like a fist through wet paper. Zarketh's armor took the hit center mass. The impact sounded like someone had dropped an anvil on a bell. The commander staggered backward, boots losing purchase on ice arms windmilling for balance that wasn't coming. He hit the snow hard, shield crackling and dying around him like static electricity in a dying storm. Silence. The kind of silence that comes when the universe pauses to recalculate. Garrett didn't celebrate. He adjusted his sight picture and fired again. The M2 roared to life properly now. Not one shot, but a sustained burst that turned the frozen morning into a percussion symphony. Brass casings tumbled bright through the air, steaming when they hit snow. The gun shook and its mount recoil transferred through the tripod into permafrost, every round a hammer blow against assumptions that had stood for 2 centuries. Tracers reached across the killing field like burning fingers. The Calibran's shields lit up in sequence, brilliant flares of blue and gold, and colors that didn't have names in human language. Defensive systems struggled, adapted, failed. One shield collapsed entirely, dissolving into sparks. Another held for 3 seconds before cracking like ice on a spring pond. The hover vehicles lurched sideways, their pilots suddenly aware they weren't invulnerable. Zarketh pushed himself to his knees. His armor's paint was scorched where the round had hit. Not penetrated, the armor itself was good, Garrett had to give them that, but scorched, marked, proven, not infinite. The commander's hand went to his chest piece, fingers tracing the impact crater. Through his visor, Garrett couldn't see his face. Didn't need to. The body language said everything. Shock, confusion, the first taste of an emotion the Calibran Empire had long since forgotten. Doubt. Garrett released the trigger. Let the gun breathe. Smoke curled from the barrel ghost-like in the cold air. Cease fire, Colonel Voss's voice came over the radio, sharp and immediate. All units, cease fire. The M2 went quiet. So did the M60s, the M240s, the old M1919 that had fired its entire belt before anyone could stop the gunny behind it. The snowfield looked like someone had tried to plow it with tracer rounds. Steam rose from impact points. Spent brass gleamed like scattered gold. The Calibran stood frozen. Not literally. They were still moving, still breathing, still processing. But their formation had dissolved. Their certainty had cracked. And Zarketh remained on his knees, one hand on the snow, the other still touching the place where a 91-year-old weapon design had just rewritten everything he knew about warfare. Eli's voice came quiet from behind cover. Holy shit. Yeah, Garrett said. His hands were steady on the gun, heart rate barely elevated. This was just work. Honest work with honest tools. Holy shit. Zarketh stood. It took him longer than it should have. The armor-assisted servos whining, but there was hesitation in the movement. Recalibration. The commander looked at his troops, at the hover vehicles with their flickering shields, at the humans who'd just punched holes in doctrine that had conquered 47 worlds. He walked forward, not fast, not slow, measured. Every step deliberate, like a man testing ice he no longer trusted. He stopped 10 meters from Garrett's position, close enough to talk, far enough to run if things went bad. How? The word came rough through the speakers, not angry, genuinely confused. Our shields are calibrated against all known kinetic threats. Railguns, coil guns, Gauss weaponry. We've countered projectile weapons for 200 years. How did you... Your shields read energy signatures, Garrett said. This doesn't have one, just mass and velocity. Zarketh was quiet, processing. Behind him, the Calibran forces began reorganizing. Shields came back online, flickering uncertainly. The hover vehicles repositioned, keeping more distance now, learning. Crude, Zarketh said finally. Yeah, but... The commander tilted his head, that alien gesture that somehow conveyed reluctant respect. Effective. Yeah. Zarketh looked at the M2 like it was a snake that had just bitten him. This weapon, it fires how many rounds per minute? 450 to 500 depending on how well you maintain it. And your ammunition supply. Enough. The alien was quiet again. Then he turned, addressed Colonel Voss, who'd emerged from the observation post. Colonel, your demonstration has been educational. Our preliminary assessment is that human kinetic warfare retains marginal battlefield utility against standard shield configurations. However, a transmission cut through, high band, priority override. The voice that came through Zarketh's comm was different, colder, more layered, like multiple speakers harmonizing. It spoke in Calibran, but the translation software picked it up for the human observers. Commander Zarketh, this is Fleet Admiral Kethron. We have monitored your demonstration. Your assessment is premature, and your failure to anticipate primitive kinetic effectiveness represents significant intelligence deficit. Earth's probationary status remains unchanged pending full review. Zarketh stiffened. Admiral, with respect, the humans demonstrated unexpected. You were defeated by museum pieces, Commander. By weapons our species abandoned before your hatching cycle. This is unacceptable. The preliminary demonstration is concluded. Earth remains under probation. Indefinite. The transmission cut. Silence settled over the snowfield like a shroud. Colonel Voss's face had gone pale. Indefinite probation, we just proved. You proved nothing. Zarketh's voice had changed, harder now, embarrassed. You surprised us. Congratulations. But one successful engagement does not qualify your species for Galactic Council membership. Our empire has standards, protocols. A single demonstration against unprepared forces proves only that you can be unexpectedly violent, not that you deserve to stand among civilized. Objection. The new voice came from everywhere and nowhere. The air itself seemed to vibrate with authority. Garrett felt it in his chest like standing too close to a subwoofer. A hologram materialized above the snowfield. It showed a being unlike the Calivran, smaller, older. Its form was vaguely humanoid, but clearly not human. Four-armed skin that shifted between silver and bronze eyes, that numbered more than 2 and less than 10 depending on how you counted. It wore robes that seemed to be made of light and regret. I am High Arbiter Quen of the Galactic Council Judiciary. I invoke Precedent 47 subsection Gamma Trial by Combat Doctrine. Zarketh went very still. Arbiter, this situation does not warrant. You deemed them unworthy without full assessment, Commander. The humans have now demonstrated capability that contradicts your initial judgment. Under Council law, they have the right to prove themselves through extended engagement. Not a demonstration, a trial. Colonel Voss found her voice. What kind of trial? The Arbiter's hologram turned those multiple eyes focusing. 48 hours. Full combat engagement between Calivran forces and human defenders. Broadcast galaxy-wide on all Council frequencies. Observed by representatives of every member species. At the conclusion, the Council will vote on Earth's petition for membership based not on prejudgment, but on witnessed capability. That's insane, Voss said. We're barely a spacefaring species. The Calivran have conquered 47 worlds. Yes, I am aware. The Arbiter's voice carried something that might have been amusement or might have been contempt, which is precisely why this trial matters. If Earth can stand against the Calivran Empire's doctrine for 48 hours, you will have proven worthiness beyond question. If you cannot, the hologram let that hang. Zarketh stepped forward. Arbiter Quen, I must protest. My forces are configured for demonstration, not sustained combat. This is highly irregular. Your protest is noted and denied. You declared humans primitive. They have contested that declaration with evidence. The law is clear. The Arbiter paused. Unless you wish to withdraw your assessment and recommend immediate Council membership. Silence. Zarketh's posture said everything. Pride wouldn't let him back down. Not in front of the galaxy. No Arbiter. My assessment stands. Humans are primitive. This trial will prove it. Then we have terms. The hologram brightened. 48 hours beginning at dawn tomorrow. Calivran forces may deploy up to Standard Expeditionary Battle Group, 200 personnel, mechanized support air assets within atmospheric limitations. Humans may deploy whatever forces they can muster from this base. No orbital bombardment, no strategic weapons, victory conditions. Hold designated defensive positions for full duration or force Calivran withdrawal through combat action. Defeat conditions, loss of defensive positions or surrender. The Arbiter's eyes found Garrett. All of them. Master Sergeant Mercer, do you understand the stakes? This trial will be viewed by 3 billion sentient beings across 43 species. How your species performs in the next 48 hours will determine how every civilization in known space perceives humanity for the next 1,000 years. You will not simply be fighting for a council seat. You will be defining humanity's reputation among the stars. Garrett looked at the M2, at Eli crouched behind cover, pale and trembling, at the other NCOs who'd been dragged out of retirement to fight a demonstration that had just become a war. He thought about Montana, about every kid and grandkid and great-grandkid who'd grow up under whatever reputation Earth earned in the next 2 days. We understand, Arbiter. Then prepare yourselves. Dawn tomorrow. The galaxy is watching. The hologram dissolved. The weight of 3 billion eyes settled onto 40 humans standing in the snow. They had 20 hours. Garrett spent the first 2 hours doing the only thing he knew how to do, checking the gun. Every tolerance, every measurement, headspace, timing, feed mechanism. The barrel was good for another 10,000 rounds, maybe 15 if he babied it. They had spare barrels, they had ammunition, they had time to prepare. What they didn't have was enough people. The base mustered 43 combat-effective personnel against 200 Calivran, with hover vehicles, with air support, with shields that now knew to expect kinetic weapons and would adapt accordingly. Miller found Garrett in the armory around 0900. "This is fucked," the gunny said without preamble. "We won one demonstration because we surprised them. Now they know. They'll adjust, spread formations, use cover, overwhelm us with numbers. Probably, Mahi. So what's the plan?" Garrett looked at the M2. At the other weapons being prepped around the armory. M60s, M240s. Old M14s someone had pulled from storage. A Carl Gustav recoilless rifle that had last seen action in Grenada. "We use terrain," he said. "We precite fields of fire. We make them come to us through kill zones. We don't fight their fight. That's Defense 101, Sarge. They're not stupid." "No, but they're arrogant." Garrett pulled out a tactical map of the area. "They've conquered 47 worlds by overwhelming them with technology and speed. They don't do patient. They don't do careful. They do dominant. So we make dominant cost them." Miller studied the map. Reverse slope defense. Among other things, interlocking fields of fire, pre-ranged mortar positions, channeling terrain. We can't outgun them, so we outposition them. That only works if they play along. Then we make them want to play along. Garrett tapped the map. We give them a target they can't ignore. We make them angry. We make them want to prove a point. And while they're proving it, we're killing them. Eli appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. The kid looked like he hadn't slept. "I analyzed the shield performance from this morning," he said. "They're adaptive, but the adaptation takes time. If we can sustain fire for more than 2 seconds, overwhelm the recharge cycle, the shields collapse for approximately 0.3 seconds before coming back online. That's our window." 0.3 seconds is nothing, Miller said. "It's enough." Garrett pulled an ammunition can toward him, started counting belts. "We're not trying to destroy them. We're trying to survive them for 48 hours. Every shield we collapse, every vehicle we disable, every second we make them reconsider their tactics. That's a win." "And when they adapt completely," Eli asked quietly, "when they figure out how to counter sustained kinetic fire?" Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then we adapt too. That's what humans do. We improvise, we make do. We survive things that should kill us because we're too stubborn to know when we're beaten." He looked at both of them. "Get the word out. All NCO's team leaders, anyone who's ever called fire or held a line. Meeting in 20 minutes. We've got one night to turn 40 undertrained soldiers into something that can make the galaxy respect us." They left. Garrett stayed with the M2 hands, moving over familiar metal mine, running through scenarios and counters, and the mathematics of survival. They used the night well. Garrett positioned the heavy weapons first. M2s on the high points, overlapping fields of fire. M60s in the draws and defiles where vehicles would have to slow. The Carl Gustav on a ridge with clear sight lines to anything that hovered. Every position pre-sighted range cards made sectors of fire assigned. The younger soldiers dug fighting positions, proper ones. Deep enough to protect from blast, narrow enough to limit exposure, camouflage with snow and local vegetation. Old-school infantry work that the modern army had mostly forgotten in favor of technological solutions. Eli ran communications, setting up a network that didn't rely on anything the Calivran could jam. Field phones with actual wire, visual signals, runners, Vietnam-era solutions that worked when satellites didn't. Miller drilled the teams on discipline. You fire when you're told. You move when you're told. You don't think you're Rambo because we won one demonstration. You're scared kids with old guns fighting things from science fiction, and the only thing keeping you alive is listening to the men who've done this before. Around midnight, Colonel Voss found Garrett on the line. "You should sleep," she said. "Should." She stood beside him, looking out at the defensive positions. At the soldiers moving through the dark, carrying ammunition, filling sandbags, preparing for something none of them were truly ready for. "Do you think we can win?" she asked quietly. Garrett considered that. "Win, no. We can't beat them. Not in any meaningful sense. But can we last 48 hours? Can we make them work for it? Can we prove we're not a joke?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe. If everyone does their job and we get lucky." That's not exactly inspiring. You want inspiring, Colonel, hire a motivational speaker. You want honest, we're outgunned, outnumbered, and outclassed. But we've got one advantage they don't expect. What's that? We've got nothing to lose and everything to prove. Garrett pulled out a cigarette, remembered he'd quit, put it back. The Calavran are fighting to maintain their reputation. We're fighting to earn one. That makes us dangerous. Voss was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm making you field commander for the duration. You've got tactical control. Whatever you need, you get. I need a time machine and 50 more machine guns. I'll see what I can do about the guns. She left. Garrett stayed on the line until 0300 walking positions, checking fields of fire, making small adjustments that might mean the difference between holding and breaking. The soldiers watched him, drew confidence from his presence, from the fact that a 62-year-old man who'd done this before thought they had a chance. He hoped he wasn't lying to them. Dawn came too fast and too certain. Garrett stood behind the M2 Eli at his side. The defensive line was ready. 43 humans spread across 200 meters of prepared ground. Old guns, old tactics, old men leading kids who'd never fired a shot in anger. The galaxy was watching. Through every screen, every holographic display, every sensory input device that could translate human warfare into comprehensible data, 3 billion beings tuned in. Some curious, some contemptuous, some hopeful that the newcomers might actually have something to teach. The Calibran deployed at 0600 exactly. This time there was no ceremony, no speeches, no theatrical demonstration of superiority. This was business. Combat operations executed with the precision of a species that had done this 47 times before. 200 soldiers, 12 hover vehicles, 6 atmospheric fighters that screamed overhead, establishing air superiority before settling into overwatch positions. Commander Zarketh's voice came over all frequencies. Human defenders, we commence operations. You have chosen this trial. We will grant you the full measure of it. Good hunting. The Calavran advanced, not in a line, not in neat formations, in fire teams using cover shields at maximum sensors, sweeping for pre-positioned forces. They'd learned, adapted. This wasn't the arrogant stroll from yesterday's demonstration. This was war. Hold fire, Garrett said quietly into the comm. Let them come. Let them commit. The Calavran moved closer. 400 meters, 300, breaking into assault groups, hover vehicles providing mobile cover fighters, orbiting above, ready to suppress any strong points. 200 meters, Garrett waited, breathed, felt the cold air in his lungs, the gun solid under his hands, the weight of history and future pressing down on this moment. 100 meters, the first Calavran fire team crossed into the primary kill zone. Now, Garrett said, every gun on the line opened up simultaneously. The M2S roared in concert, a wall of sound and fury. Tracers webbed through the dawn light, intersecting fields of fire that turned the kill zone into a meat grinder. Shields flared and died. Calavran soldiers went down their armor-proof against individual rounds, but not sustained barrages. Hover vehicles lurched sideways, shields collapsing under concentrated fire. But the Calavran didn't break. They adapted immediately. Smoke grenades deployed, obscuring sightlines. The hover vehicles spread using terrain for cover, providing suppressing fire that forced human positions to duck. The atmospheric fighters dove strafing runs that tore up the tundra, forcing teams to abandon positions. Fall back to secondary positions, Garrett ordered. Leapfrog retreat. Teams 1 and 3 provide cover. The line flexed, bent, didn't break. Humans fell back in good order, one team moving while another fired, covering each other like they'd trained for decades instead of hours. The Calavran pressed forward, taking casualties but gaining ground, learning with each meter, adjusting tactics, coordinating fire. This was what 200 years of military evolution looked like, and humanity was barely holding. Miller's voice came over the comm, strained. They're flanking south. I need support, or we're going to get rolled. A negative, Garrett said, tracking targets through his sights. Hold as long as you can, then withdraw to checkpoint Charlie. We planned for this. Planned for getting our asses kicked. Planned for trading space for time. Move. The battle raged for 3 hours. By 0900, the humans had lost the forward positions. 6 soldiers wounded, 2 critical. The Calavran held half the original defensive zone and were pushing for more. Their casualties were higher, 14 confirmed kills, multiple damaged vehicles, but they had the numbers to absorb losses that would cripple the human force. Garrett pulled everyone back to the primary defensive line. Tighter, more concentrated. Interlocking fire from positions they'd spent all night preparing. The Calavran paused, regrouped, prepared for the final push. Zarketh's voice came over the radio. Impressive resistance, Sergeant Mercer. You have lasted longer than expected. But this is finished. Surrender now. I will ensure your wounded receive medical care. Garrett looked at Eli beside him. The kid was bleeding from a shrapnel cut on his forehead, hands shaking on his rifle, but still there, still ready. He looked at Miller, at the other NCOs, at the young soldiers who'd followed old men into a fight they couldn't win and hadn't broken yet. He looked at the M2. We're not done yet, Commander, Garrett said. Then we will finish it. The Calibran attacked everything, all at once. Coordinated assault from three sides, hover vehicles providing mobile cover, atmospheric fighters, suppressing strong points, soldiers advancing in disciplined fire teams that used every lesson learned from the morning engagement. The human line buckled. Positions fell. The south flank collapsed entirely, forced to abandon weapons and fall back. The north held longer, but took devastating casualties. The center, Garrett's position, became the focal point of an assault designed to end resistance. Shields and bullets and plasma and tracer fire turned the snowfield into hell rendered in fire and ice. Garrett fired until the barrel glowed, changed it, fired more. Eli fed ammunition, called targets, worked the gun like he'd been born to it. Around them, the position held, barely, by will more than capability. Then the ammunition ran dry. Not completely, but enough. The sustained fire that had been their primary defense dropped to sporadic shots. Disciplined retreat became desperate withdrawal. The line that had held since dawn finally inevitably broke. All units fall back to final defensive positions, Colonel Voss ordered. Prepare for last stand. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Humanity's 48-hour trial had lasted 12. The final defensive position was a ridge overlooking the base. Natural terrain, good fields of fire, nowhere left to retreat. 43 soldiers had become 27 effective. Ammunition reserves at 30%. Medical supplies exhausted. The Calibran regrouping for the assault that would end it. Garrett sat behind the M2, exhausted ribs aching from recoil transferred through too many hours of sustained fire. Eli slumped beside him, the kid's hands wrapped in makeshift bandages bleeding through. This was it, the last stand. The moment where Earth either proved it could face the galaxy or proved the Calibran right. Miller crawled over. We're done, Sarge. We gave them a fight, but we're done. Yeah, Garrett's voice came rough. Yeah, we're done. So what now? Garrett looked at the M2, at the gun that had never failed him, at the weapon that was still ready to fire even when the men behind it weren't. Now we make them remember us. He keyed the command frequency. Colonel Voss, permission to address the troops. Granted, Garrett stood. It hurt. Everything hurt, but he stood. The 27 survivors turned to look at him, young faces, scared faces, determined faces. Human faces waiting to see if the old man had one more answer. I'm not going to lie to you, Garrett said. His voice carried across the position, steady despite exhaustion. We're losing. They have us outnumbered, outgunned, and cornered. Militarily speaking, this is over, but... He paused, chose his words carefully. The galaxy is watching. 3 billion beings are seeing how humans fight when the odds are impossible. And what they're seeing is that we don't quit. We don't fold. We make them work for every meter, every second. Every drop of ground costs them blood and time and the certainty they came here with. He gestured toward the Calibran positions. They thought we were primitive, obsolete, not worth their time. And maybe they're right about the first two, but the third... He shook his head. We've proven we're worth their time. We've proven we deserve to be taken seriously. Not because we won, but because we fought. Silence. Then Eli spoke up, voice hoarse. What happens when they overrun us? Then we make sure they remember why it took them 12 hours instead of 12 minutes. We make sure every species watching knows that humans don't give cheap victories. We cost, and that cost buys respect. Miller nodded slowly. How long we got? Minutes, maybe less. They're done being careful. Next attack is everything they have. Then let's give them everything we have left. The troops returned to positions, checked weapons, said prayers or made peace or just breathed and waited for the end. Garrett settled behind the M2 one last time, chambered around, adjusted his sight picture, thought about Montana, about the barn and all the quiet years that were better than glory, but not better than meaning. Zarketh's voice came over the radio. Sergeant Mercer, final opportunity. Surrender. Your resistance has been noted. The trial can end with honor rather than casualties. Garrett looked at Eli, at the kid who'd come to Montana to learn about an old gun and instead learned what it meant to stand for something bigger. What do you think? He asked quietly. Eli's hands were steady now, fear burned away by something harder. Think they haven't seen us quit yet. Damn right they haven't. Garrett keyed the transmit. Commander Zarketh, we appreciate the offer, but we're going to need you to come take this position the hard way. We've got nothing better to do today. Silence on the other end. Then, and Garrett would swear to this, later he heard something that sounded like alien laughter. As you wish, Sergeant. We shall be thorough. The Calivran forces moved into final assault positions. Garrett checked the ammunition belt one last time. 500 rounds left. Against 200 soldiers. Bad odds. But the gun didn't care about odds. It cared about function. About doing the job it was built for until it couldn't anymore. Here they come, someone said. The assault began. Anhai Arbiter Quinn, watching from orbit, with 3 billion others, made a decision that would change everything. Her hologram materialized above the battlefield. Ceasefire. All forces immediate ceasefire. The Calivrans stopped mid-advance, confusion rippling through their ranks. Zarketh's voice came urgent. Arbiter, the trial parameters are being modified under Council Emergency Powers Section 12. Quinn's multiple eyes surveyed the battlefield. I have witnessed sufficient evidence to render preliminary judgment. Preliminary, Voss's voice came uncertain. The trial was 48 hours. I rigged the trial, Colonel. Silence. Every human, every Calivran, every being watching across the galaxy went still. I beg your pardon, Zarketh said slowly. Quinn's hologram seemed to shimmer with something that might have been satisfaction. The trial parameters favored Calivran forces deliberately. I granted them air superiority, numerical advantage, and advanced knowledge of human capabilities. This was not meant to be fair. This was meant to test if humans could stand against overwhelming odds. She turned her full attention to Garrett. Master Sergeant Mercer, in 12 hours with 43 soldiers armed with 90-year-old weapons, you inflicted 14% casualties on a Calivran expeditionary force, forced 3 tactical withdrawals, and held defensive positions through sustained assault by technologically superior forces. You lost. Militarily, you were defeated. But the pause carried weight. You were not destroyed. You were not demoralized. You were not broken. You demanded respect through capability, courage, and refusal to surrender dignity, even in defeat. This, Sergeant, is what I was testing. Not victory, worthiness. Garrett found his voice. So what now? Now I call for council vote, immediate ballot broadcast to all member species. The question before the Galactic Council: has humanity demonstrated sufficient capability, courage, and character to warrant full council membership? The hologram expanded, showing representatives from 43 species across known space. The vote took 17 seconds, 46 in favor, 3 abstentions, 0 opposed. High Arbiter Tiktuan's voice rang across the galaxy. By council decree, Earth is hereby granted full membership with all rights and responsibilities thereof. Humanity is recognized as a peer species entitled to representation, trade, and protection under council law. The trial is concluded. Welcome to the stars. The hologram dissolved. The battlefield was silent. Then Eli started laughing. Quiet at first, then harder, the kind of laughter that comes when tension breaks and you realize you're still alive and the world just changed forever. The laughter spread. Human soldiers collapsing behind cover, exhausted and wounded, and victorious in a way that had nothing to do with winning battles and everything to do with earning respect. Garrett stayed behind the M2. He looked at the gun, at the weapon that had spoken when words weren't enough, at the machinery that had never lied about what it was or what it could do. We did it, Eli said, voice rough with exhaustion and wonder. We actually did it. Yeah. Garrett's hands were still on the gun's handles, still ready. Yeah, we did. Across the snowfield, the Commander Zarketh stood watching the humans celebrate. Then he did something no Calivran had done in 200 years of conquest. He walked toward the enemy position, alone, without weapons, without shields. He walked to Garrett's position and stopped. Sergeant Mercer. Commander. They regarded each other, human and alien, old soldier and proud warrior. 2 beings who'd spent 12 hours trying to kill each other and earned understanding through violence. Your weapon, Zarketh said quietly. It is old, primitive, obsolete by every measure my people use. Yeah, but it works. Yeah. And you are old, by human standards, past prime military age, retired. Garrett smiled. Yeah, to all that too. Zarketh reached out one armored hand. But you work. Garrett took the hand, shook it, felt the strength there, the respect earned through blood and fire and stubborn refusal to quit. We all work, Commander. We just needed you to notice. Somewhere above in orbit and beyond, 3 billion beings watched two warriors shake hands over weapons that shouldn't have mattered but did. The galaxy was learning, and humanity had just taught the first lesson. The medics came in force, human and Calibron, both working side by side in a field hospital that had materialized with efficiency that spoke to long practice. The Calibran medical technology was impressive scanners that diagnosed injuries through armor regenerative foam, that sealed wounds, analgesics that worked on human neurochemistry despite never encountering it before. But it was the human medics who held hands, who spoke quietly to the wounded, who understood that sometimes healing required more than closing wounds. Garrett sat on a transport bumper while a Calibran medic, her armor marked with silver symbols that apparently meant healer, examined his ribs. The scanner hummed against his chest, warm and invasive. 3 fractured ribs, she said through her translator. The voice was feminine, clinical, curious. Severe bruising across the torso, muscle strain in both shoulders, minor hearing damage. For a being of your age, structure to sustain combat operations under these injuries is, she paused, searching for the word, remarkable. I'm tough to kill. Evidently. The scanner moved lower. Your skeletal density is significantly higher than our projections suggested. Is this typical for humans? We evolved on a heavy world. 1 standard gravity makes us dense. The medic went still. 1G continuously. Since we learned to walk. She exchanged what looked like a glance with another Calivran medic nearby. Some silent communication passed between them. When she looked back, her posture had shifted, more respectful. That explains much. You fight injured. You fight exhausted. You fight under conditions that would incapacitate species from lighter worlds. Not because you are better trained, because your planet made you resilient or killed you. Something like that. She applied something to his ribs. It felt cold, then warm, then numb. The pain receded like tide going out. You will heal. Your species heals efficiently. Another adaptation to your gravity, I suspect. She stepped back. Master Sergeant Mercer, it was an honor to face you in combat. You have given my people much to consider. She left before he could respond. Eli found him 10 minutes later. The kid's head was wrapped in bandages, arm in a sling, but he was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. They're calling it the Stand at Yukon, Eli said, shoving his tablet toward Garrett. It's trending across 43 species. 3 billion views in the first hour. The commentary sections are insane. Garrett took the tablet. The translation software struggled with some of the alien languages, but the sentiment was clear. Shock, respect, debate, arguments between species about whether humans had won or lost, whether the trial was fair, whether Earth deserved membership. But underneath it all, one thread ran consistent. The humans hadn't quit. Look at this one, Eli said, pointing. It's from a species called the Vorenton. They're pacifists, haven't fought a war in 600 years. But they voted for our admission because, and I'm quoting here, any species that fights 12 hours with 90-year-old weapons rather than surrender dignity deserves respect, not pity. Garrett scrolled through more comments, some hostile, some admiring, all engaged, all talking about humanity like we were real, present, worthy of consideration. We changed the conversation, he said quietly. We changed more than that. Eli took the tablet back. 5 species have already requested military exchange programs. They want to learn kinetic warfare doctrine. They want to understand how we held that long. They want to learn from us. From old guns and tactics. From humans who wouldn't quit. The debriefing took 6 hours. Colonel Voss, Commander Zarketh, High Arbiter Quen via hologram, and every tactical analyst in 3-star systems who wanted to understand how 43 humans with museum pieces had lasted 12 hours against the Calivran Empire's doctrine. Garrett walked them through it. The terrain use, the interlocking fields of fire, the disciplined retreat, the willingness to trade space for time, all the old infantry basics that the modern military had largely abandoned in favor of technological solutions. Zarketh listened with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. We adapted, the commander said when Garrett finished. We changed tactics, spread formations, used cover, coordinated fire, and still you held. You adapted to threats you understood, Garrett said, but sustained kinetic fire from pre-sighted positions. That wasn't in your playbook anymore. You'd forgotten it was possible. We conquered 47 worlds without needing it, and lost 14% casualties to 43 humans because you didn't have it. Silence around the briefing table. High Arbiter Quen's hologram leaned forward, those multiple eyes focusing. This is the heart of the matter, is it not? The Caliveran Empire, like most council species, has optimized warfare for specific threat profiles. Energy weapons, shield technology, electronic warfare. But in doing so, they created blind spots, vulnerabilities to tactics they deemed obsolete. Not just obsolete, Zarketh said quietly, beneath consideration. We didn't plan for kinetic threats because we didn't believe anyone still used them. Pride, Quinn said, the assumption that advancement means abandoning everything that came before. Humanity has reminded us that some principles remain true regardless of technology. Fire and maneuver, defense in depth, disciplined retreat. These are not obsolete. They are foundational. She turned to Garrett, which is why the Council has voted to establish the Terran Military Advisory Corps. Humans will be seconded to member species militaries to teach, what shall we call it? Ground truth, Garrett said. Appropriate ground truth. The basics of warfare that don't change regardless of weapons. Terrain, psychology, endurance. The things that matter when technology fails or encounters something it wasn't designed to counter. You want us to teach aliens how to fight? I want you to teach the galaxy that humanity's so-called primitiveness is actually institutional memory the rest of us have lost. Quinn's hologram smiled, which was somehow more unsettling than her serious expression. You will be ambassadors, advisors, instructors, and Master Sergeant Garrett Mercer. You will lead the first cohort. Garrett looked at the M2 standing in the corner of the briefing room. Someone had brought it in, cleaned and oiled, still ready despite 12 hours of sustained combat. I'm 62 years old, Arbiter. I should be on a porch somewhere, not teaching aliens. Precisely why you're qualified? You have lived long enough to know that experience matters. She leaned back. Besides, Sergeant, do you truly wish to return to Montana and wonder what might have been? He didn't have an answer for that. The news reached Earth 4 hours later. Garrett watched it on a screen in the rec room, surrounded by soldiers who'd become brothers in 12 hours of fire. The president addressed the nation, the world, the species, talked about humanity's new place among the stars, about respect earned, about the soldiers who'd made it possible. Someone had leaked helmet camera footage. Grainy, chaotic, but real. It showed the battle from ground level, showed humans fighting and bleeding and holding, showed the M2 roaring defiance at hover vehicles, showed old men teaching young soldiers how to face the impossible. The footage ended with Garrett and Zarketh shaking hands. The rec room erupted in cheers. Garrett slipped out. Needed air, needed quiet, needed to process what they'd done and what it meant and whether he'd earned the right to feel proud or just felt lucky to be alive. He found Zarketh on the observation deck alone, looking out at the tundra where they'd tried to kill each other that morning. Commander. Sergeant. Zarketh didn't turn. I have been reassigned. The Emperor feels my performance during the trial reflects poorly on Caliveran military competency. You got fired for losing to humans, for failing to anticipate you, for allowing museum pieces to inflict unacceptable casualties, for being defeated by tactics we abandoned before my hatching cycle. Garrett stepped up beside him. For the record, you fought well, adapted fast. If you'd had another 6 hours, you probably would have broken us. Perhaps, but I did not have 6 hours. I had the 12 you granted me. And in those 12 hours, you taught my species something we desperately needed to learn. What's that? Humility. Zarketh's posture shifted, something that might have been a shrug in human body language. We have conquered 47 worlds, but we had never truly been challenged, never faced an enemy that made us question our doctrine. You did more than wound our pride, Sergeant. You wounded our certainty, and that I suspect will prove far more valuable in the long term. They stood in silence for a moment. What will you do now? Garrett asked. I have been offered a position as military liaison to the Terran Advisory Corps. The Emperor believes it appropriate that I learn from the species that defeated me. A punishment disguised as opportunity. Or perhaps an opportunity disguised as punishment. I have not yet decided which. You'll be working with us, if you will have me. Garrett thought about that, about fighting beside the alien who tried to kill him, about teaching instead of destroying, about building something new from old weapons and older lessons. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I think we can make that work. The formal ceremony happened 3 days later. Representatives from every council species attended physically or via hologram. The venue was the base parade ground, hastily expanded and decorated with flags from 43 worlds. Humanity's flag hung at the center, stars and stripes looking somehow both defiant and welcoming among the alien symbols. High Arbiter Quen presided. She spoke about the trial, about humanity's performance, about the lessons learned and the changes coming. Her voice carried across the assembly and was broadcast to every corner of council space. For 200 years, the Galactic Council has operated under certain assumptions. That advancement means abandoning the old. That superior technology guarantees victory. That species from heavy worlds with primitive weapons pose no credible military threat. Humanity has proven all three assumptions false. She gestured toward the human survivors standing at attention. 27 soldiers who'd held against 200. Who'd made the galaxy stop and pay attention? These warriors fought with weapons designed before their grandparents were born. They employed tactics older than their nations. They faced defeat and chose to fight anyway, not for victory, but for respect. They won not by being superior, but by being unwilling to quit. Quen's multiple eyes swept the assembly. This is the lesson Earth brings to the Council, not advanced technology, not new doctrine, but courage and competence, and refusal to surrender matter more than any advantage. She turned to Garrett. Master Sergeant Garrett Mercer, step forward. Garrett marched to the platform, 62 years old, ribs taped, shoulders aching, but marching like he'd done 1,000 times before in ceremonies that mattered less than this one. Quen reached into her robes, which seemed to be made of light and concept rather than actual fabric, and withdrew something. A metal, but not human design. This was alien work crafted from metals that shifted color in the light, inscribed with symbols that moved when you weren't looking directly at them. This is the Council Star of Valor. It has been awarded 17 times in Council history, always to beings who changed the trajectory of galactic civilization through personal courage. You are the 18th recipient, and the first human. She placed it around his neck. The weight was strange, not heavy, but present, real. Wear it well, Sergeant. You have earned it in ways that transcend species and technology. You have reminded us all what it means to stand. The assembly erupted in sounds that might have been applause in 43 different languages. Garrett stood at attention, feeling the weight of 3 billion eyes. He thought about Montana, about how he'd be proud anyway. Speech, someone called from the crowd. Garrett hadn't prepared anything, hadn't expected this. But he looked at the faces, human and alien alike, and found words. I'm just a soldier, did my job with the tools I had, nothing special. He touched the M2 that stood at the platform's edge, ever present. This gun's been working since 1933. It's old, it's simple, but it works, it's honest. It doesn't lie about what it is or what it does. He paused. I think that's what you saw in us. Not advanced tactics or secret weapons, just humans being honest about who we are and what we can do. We're not the strongest, we're not the smartest, we're not the most advanced, but we're the ones who will keep fighting when quitting makes more sense. Who'll hold the line when the line's supposed to break? Who'll stand up even when standing up costs everything? He looked at Zarketh in the crowd, at Quen, at the assembled species. You wanted to know if humanity deserves a seat at the table. I can't answer that, but I can tell you we won't waste the seat. We won't take it for granted, and we won't stop being who we are just because we're sitting among stars. He stepped back. The applause was genuine this time, louder, understanding. Montana in September was different from Alaska in November. Warmer, gentler, the kind of weather that made you believe winter was a myth and life would always be this good. Garrett stood in his barn, expanded now with new equipment and students who needed more space than one old man, and a gun watching 5 cadets field strip their weapons. 3 of the cadets were human, 2 were not. The Kalivran cadet, a young soldier named Venkyle, worked with deliberate precision. His hands, 3-fingered and armored, handled the M2's components with respect that bordered on reverence. The Vorentine cadet struggled. Her species' philosophy of pacifism hadn't prepared her for mechanical violence, but she'd volunteered anyway. Said her people needed to understand weapons even if they wouldn't use them. Said knowing how to fight made choosing not to fight meaningful. Headspace, Garrett said, walking behind them. You're not checking headspace. The gun doesn't care if you're from Earth or Calivra or anywhere else. You check headspace or it jams. Venkyle immediately pulled the headspace gauge, measured, adjusted. His earlier attempt to skip this step had resulted in a jam that embarrassed him for 3 days. He learned. The human cadets were faster but sloppier. Too confident, too sure they understood because it was human technology. Garrett corrected them more harshly. Private Morrison, that barrel's misaligned by .2 millimeters. You think that doesn't matter? Fire it like that and watch what happens to your accuracy. Start over. Yes, Sergeant. Eli appeared in the barn doorway. He was Captain Brennan, now officially assigned as Garrett's XO for the advisory corps. The kid had filled out over 5 years, still thin, still engineer-minded, but harder, tested. Transport's inbound, Eli said. New cohort from the Dravani Assembly. Apparently they want to learn why heavy weapons doctrine works better than their missile swarms. How many at 12, plus observers from 4 other species? Garrett nodded. The barn had become something bigger than he'd imagined. Not just his personal workshop, but a training ground where species from across the galaxy came to learn what human stubbornness looked like when applied to warfare. Finish the assembly, he told the cadets. Then we're going to the range. I want to see if any of you actually learned to shoot. They worked faster. Nobody wanted to disappoint the old man. The range was 3 miles from the house. Garrett had expanded it over 5 years, extended the distance, added more target types, built positions for different weapon systems. It looked less like a ranch and more like a training facility, but he'd kept the barn, kept the original setup, kept the spaces where memory lived. The cadets set up their guns, human and alien side by side, working through the same checklist, following the same procedures. The Calavran moved faster, their species had better spatial awareness. The Vorentin moved more carefully, their species valued precision over speed. But they all worked. Venkal, Garrett called. You're up first. Standard drill. Engage targets at 400 meters. Controlled bursts. Show me you learned something. The young Calavran soldier moved behind the M2, settled into position. His body structure was different from human, but he'd adapted. Found his stance. Found his grip. He breathed. Aligned sights. Fired. The gun roared. Brass tumbled. Tracers reached downrange and found targets. Not perfect, but competent. Honest work with honest tools. Garrett watched through binoculars. Low and left. Adjust 2 clicks, right, 1 click, up. Fire again. Venikal made the corrections without argument. Fired. Better this time. 3 targets destroyed. Clean hits. Good, next. The Vorentine cadet stepped up. Fired. Struggled with recoil management but kept at it. Improved with each burst. The human cadets followed. Some better than the aliens, some worse. It didn't matter. They were all learning the same lesson. That the gun didn't care who you were. It cared if you knew your business. Evening came with the kind of light that photographers dream about. Garrett sat on the porch, expanded now, with chairs for visitors watching the cadets clean weapons. Eli brought him coffee. They sat in comfortable silence while the sun painted the mountains golden red. Command wants to expand the program, Eli said. Open 5 more training centers across Earth. Standardize curriculum. Turn this into an official academy. Sounds like bureaucracy. Sounds like growth. Sounds like what you built here actually working. Garrett thought about that, about his barn becoming multiple facilities, about his personal mission becoming institutional, about the day when he wouldn't be needed anymore because the lessons had taken root. Yeah, he said. Okay, but I keep this place. I keep teaching my cohorts my way. They can build their academies. But this barn, this is where students learn what matters. Deal. They watched the cadets work. Venkal was teaching one of the human privates a trick about barrel changes. The Vorentine was asking questions about sight picture. Learning happening organically. Naturally. You know they put your M2 in the Galactic Military Museum, Eli said. Right in the center of the main hall. Biggest exhibit they've got. Yeah, went there last month with a delegation. The placard's something else. Talks about how the gun taught the galaxy that simple doesn't mean weak. That humanity fights with stubbornness, not superior technology. They even kept the scorched paint from Alaska. Garrett smiled. The gun still works better than me. That's what the placard says. Last line, the gun still works. So do we. They sat in silence for a moment. You ever wonder what Sarah would think of all this? Eli asked quietly. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Every day. Thinks she'd laugh at me teaching aliens. Thinks she'd be proud I found something that mattered. Thinks she'd tell me to stop being so serious and remember to actually live while I'm doing all this important work. Good advice. Yeah, I'm working on it. The cadets emerged from the barn carrying weapons to the range for evening drills. Venikal led them, the young Calivran, who'd struggled with headspace checks 5 years ago, now teaching others. The cycle continuing. The lessons passing forward. You built something good here, Eli said. We built something necessary. There's a difference. Garrett set down his coffee cup. But yeah, it's good. It's honest work with honest tools teaching truths to people who need to hear them. Can't ask for more than that. What's next for you? Garrett looked at the barn, at the range, at the mountains beyond, at the sky where ships came and went carrying students from across the galaxy to learn from an old man in Montana who'd refused to quit when quitting made sense. Next, keep teaching, keep learning, keep proving that humans aren't going anywhere. We earned our seat. Now we've got to keep earning it every day. By teaching them to use 93-year-old machine guns. By teaching them that competence matters, that respect is earned through action, not words. That when you're outgunned and outnumbered, and the smart play is surrender, sometimes the right play is to stand anyway and make them work for it. Eli nodded slowly. The old gun, the old guard. The ways that still work because they're rooted in what's real. They walked toward the range together, toward the cadets waiting, toward the work that never quite finished, but always mattered. Behind them in the barn, another M2 Browning sat ready, 93 years old, still working, still teaching, still proving that obsolete was just another word for underestimated. And somewhere in the Galactic Military Museum on Unity Station, visitors from 43 species stopped at the scarred, honest machinery on display. Read the simple placard. Looked at the worn metal that had changed how an entire galaxy thought about warfare. Some dismissed it, called it primitive, walked away. But most paused, considered, understood. That the gun mattered not because it was advanced, but because it worked. Because someone had trusted it with their life and it hadn't failed. Because it represented a truth that transcended technology. That you don't survive by being the strongest. You survive by being too stubborn to die. Too committed to quit. Too damn ornery to bow. The old gun taught that lesson. The old guard lived it. And the galaxy was better for both.